Welcome to Summit Book Club. Our book was When Breath Becomes Air. This was a fantastic book. It was a really quick, really great read. This was a book by Dr. Paul Kalanithi, more than a memoir about his death, which if you read the book, you'd find out in the first 2 paragraphs that this was a book about Paul, who got cancer and was actually passed away by the time the book got published. It's less about dying and more about living. And he really invites us to reflect on our roles as caregivers and also just humans. So he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, lung cancer, during his last year of training. He wrote this book during his last year with quite some urgency. And there were a few themes: mortality, meaning, purpose, identity, legacy, and doctor-patient roles. It was a pretty heavy read in the end. I wasn't expecting it to feel so heavy, but it was. It was a pretty heavy read. If you read the book, you'll know, and maybe as we talk about it, the book was structured in 2 parts. One, his perfect health, his training, his search for meaning, right? And then the second part where he transitions from doctor to patient and has this emotional, spiritual reckoning. So, opening thoughts, feelings about the book. What did everyone think?
It was interesting for me to read it, in part because we were in training at the same time.
Weird.
He passed in 2015. He not that long after he finished. And I finished my residency in 2017. And so his descriptions of residency, his descriptions of why neurosurgery, why medicine, and the roles between doctor and patient, it sort of resonated. It was interesting. Another thing that sort of struck me is how messy it all is, and how a little bit chaotic. You have all of these varying things going on at the same time. People having good outcomes, people having complications and bad outcomes, family relationships that are thriving and not thriving, aspirations in the future, what's going on at the moment. Yeah, I don't know, it was interesting. And then all of a sudden it was cancer diagnosis. And then he said something that really is true for me, and that is that there's no sense of time when you're in the operating doing a surgery. Everything else just goes away.
Right.
And then you sort of come back to reality. That's exactly how I feel.
That's cool. Yeah, but it was actually, I reading it adjacent to all of you, it was a little surreal thinking, the daily ins and outs of everything that you deal with as providers, as patients, as humans. I'm sure reading it as providers was even more so, right? Reading it as a neurosurgeon to a neurosurgeon was probably very surreal reading it. So that's interesting.
I love how he talks about how it's just such a privilege to sit with their patients in the most vulnerable moments. Not too many professions or people get to do that, but you just get to sit there in those moments and he talk about the heart. I don't deal with death on a regular basis or those kind of end-stage life things, but we get to sit with these people in those challenging moments where they're just frustrated, they're just overwhelmed and fearful. We get to help process and paint that pathway of what things look like to them.
Yeah. You make a good point. You don't deal with death regularly, but you do deal with change, big change, right? Death of previous lives, rebirth of new lives, right? Like you have to sit with people when they're going through other forms of death, right? And that is pretty heavy to sit with and to kind of hold someone's hand through. So, yeah.
One thing I thought was interesting is that he had put so much of his effort into his studies and his work.
Yeah.
And then he started to realize like the most important things are his relationships. And if you even remember the book, he and his wife were actually struggling. They were looking at getting divorced. And when she found out his diagnosis, she said, "I'm going to stick with you." And so that relationship was just like solidified. And that was just so interesting to me. It just came back to the relationships.
Yeah. That in the end it was, she talked about the very end of the book. She actually wrote a chapter, right, that described the end of Paul's life, their relationship, and how if you want to pull a relationship back in the tightest way possible, it's to have someone get a terminal illness, right? Which was kind of crazy, but I think it really does show that true love that somebody has, especially as a caretaker. She was also a provider, right? Somebody that wanted to provide care, and it was a really cool relationship in the end.
In terminal illness, sometimes we have physical pain, but he also described the emotional and the spiritual death.
Yeah.
And this is why hospital is so important, because we have been working to help those kind of patients. Because he was going to the ER, they give you no medication, he was stable, but the emotional part with a medical social worker, with the spiritual people, make a little difference.
Yeah, and you see that all the time. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy part of it. Okay, awesome. I pulled together just a few quotes that I really loved about purpose, calling, and identity. I'm going to read through these really quick. Anything that comes up, please, feel free to share. Indeed, this is how 99% of people select their jobs: pay, work environment, hours. But that's the point. Putting lifestyle first is how you find a job, not a calling. Moral duty has weight. Things that have weight have gravity. And so the duty to bear mortal responsibility pulled me back into the operating room. There is a moment, a cusp, when the sum of gathered experience is worn down by the details of living. We are never so wise as when we live in this moment. So from those, how has your sense of purpose in medicine evolved? Is it still a calling, or has it become something else?
So I was thinking about this the last few weeks because it's been 10 years since I started as a neurosurgeon. In this community, people ask all the time, like, why did you select that? Why did you want to do that? And I've answered the question differently, I think, over time. But it does evolve thinking. It changes with perspective. Ultimately, the way I would answer it now is that I grew up in this community, and that there's a need for that kind of care, and so that's why I do it, and I feel sort of the duty to continue to provide that.
Yeah, to return back into the operating room. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
I would say as a new provider, I mean, I've been a nurse for 12 years, but as a new provider, I think it started out, as school, my first job. I've been a provider for a year, and I know that's early, but I do feel like it's a calling. Like, I feel like I was born to be a nurse practitioner.
I feel like you were born to be a nurse practitioner too, Steve.
So, and I think it's just something that I just enjoy it, and I think I hope that it continues to evolve into that established provider in the community, and the ability for me to reach more people, whether it be here or some of the international work that I've done and things like that. So I think that I hope that it can forever Like, I hope that they can find that purpose, because I think I have.
Yeah, I think
And
I think so
and it
too.
resonated with me. I was like, I was reading the book and I was like, man, this is like, he kind of puts into words the things that I feel.
That's cool.
Like, and so I think even though I'm not a neurosurgeon, and I know how chaotic neurosurgeons' lives are, I think I was like, man, I think we could probably take away while reading this, like, that's kind of how we all want to practice, like how his vision of things, which in such a short time with the chaotic of residency and all these, and then not even finishing, and then he passes away. I was like, this guy had it figured out right from the very beginning. He knew what he was supposed to do.
Right. Well, and I think, you bring up some interesting points, Steve. I think it's easy to say I'm just or it's not as, right? But Paul describes the most important moments of his career as the moments that he connected with people. Just the quiet, few words, really tender moments as the most important parts, right? Those connection points. And so to not limit ourselves to anything but that opportunity, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I would say along the lines of moral duty, I feel like being a new clinician is, you go through school and I'm like, oh, okay, I know all these things, and then I get into that out in the world and I'm like, wow, people actually don't know a lot about how to move. And then there's this weight of like, oh wow, you can really help a lot of people figure out their bodies, figure out how to coordinate and do different things and help them get out of pain. It was like, oh, okay, so now there's just a little bit more of a responsibility to having this license and doing that in that way, and it was, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Welcome to the foundation team, by the way.
Thanks.
Yeah, congrats. Okay, awesome. Let's talk about the doctor-patient experience. Okay, so before operating on a patient's brain, I realized I must first understand his mind. When there's no place for the scalpel, words are the surgeon's only tool. Here we are together, and here are the ways through. I promise to guide you as best I can to the other side. So do we make enough space in modern medicine to see the person behind the problem? This is something I think this group talks about all the time. But do we? Do we make the space?
It is one of the challenges, right? Because spending time is hard.
Yeah.
And being empathetic and trying to understand the perspective the patient's going through is emotionally draining sometimes. It's obvious. This last week, there was a patient that came in and he was riding his bike down the sidewalk and a car pulled from the parking lot.
Yeah.
Then he looked at the driver looked back at him. The driver stopped, he kept going, and then the driver decided to go again. Yeah, they collided.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a high speed incident. And he flipped over the handlebars and was paralyzed. And his MRI showed that this is actually pretty unusual. The spinal cord was not only severed, it was in two pieces. So we needed to do surgery so that he could sit in a chair. And there's no way that surgery would improve his ability to walk. And so I read that and thought about this situation, or vice versa, and sort of just said, hey, here's where you could. We know this is hard and challenging, and you're going to go through all the things. He had a baby 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
And the baby's in the stroller, cradle with the thing drawn over, sleepy. He's sleepy when I show the babies up, so a lot of the time. But there's sort of just this again, it's hard to describe just the emotions, the feelings that go along with all because are you really helping this person? Why did this happen? Why can't we fix it?
Mm-hmm.
So I just sort of told him, look, we're going to be here. We're going to go through a lot, and the recovery is going to be hard. And the majority of patients in this situation we see live a happy life.
Yeah. And
Try to get
Paul talked about the time that he was able to sit with his oncologist, and that those appointments were sometimes the most normal he felt, because he felt taken care of and seen, and like, oh, in this moment I, have a strategy forward, right? Somebody's looking at this and helping me move forward. So I can almost be my new self in this moment, which is really draining, like you said, but important. So
it's made me think of another book I'm reading. It's called Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. It's such a good book.
Such a good book.
And it talks about how the average human only experiences 3 emotions: sadness, anger, and happiness. And she does this study where she goes really in depth and figures out that there's 150 emotions or experiences that people feel. And so many of us, I think, just bottle up our emotions into those 3 categories and don't really feel the other things. But I think a lot of these patients just want to feel seen. But in order to feel seen, we have to work on us enough to know what those emotions feel like.
Yeah.
To be able to see what it's like. I'm going to listen to Dr. Edwards in this story, and I feel so much compassion for this man that just had a baby. And I see like this baby in this, like my heart just aches for him, But I think these patients, they want us to feel with them.
Right.
They want to be seen. And sometimes I think we think it takes a lot of time to do that. And I think we're limited on that time a lot of the time. But I think those moments don't have to be very long.
Right.
To show people that we see them and we feel, in a sense, what they're going through.
Right. Quality time is a way to connect, but there are so many other ways to genuinely connect with somebody, right? And instantly see somebody and take care of them and give them a piece of your energy, which I know is probably really consuming, but important.
There's a line in the book that I haven't stopped thinking about.
Yeah.
And I've thought about Dr. Edwards. I gotta see what his insight is on this. Paul says, the neurosurgeon must learn to adjudicate. And what he's saying by this is that when someone comes into the ER and I have the chance to save walking, I might affect speech, right?
Yeah.
I have to, at that moment, make some decisions about what someone's life is going to be like and decide which function they're gonna have or not have, or the risks of this or that. And it's really made me think about my own career, which is not neurosurgery, right? But my own career and what effect that my decisions have on the people around me. I don't necessarily mean my family, I mean the people who are the recipient of my expertise, right? I don't know if anyone else picked up on that line, but I seriously have not been able to stop thinking about that part.
Yeah, his questioning judgment calls, right? He said, like, is the most important decision I made today a Reuben sandwich or a deli sandwich, And who am I to make those judgment calls? It is a really big responsibility, but you're right, we all have them in, whatever piece of the puzzle we're fitting in. Those judgment calls are really, really critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, I like that line as well, and it's rarely that simple. It's one thing that can put it there in a simplistic description, but we never really have a complete answer as to exactly what would happen if this or that. And I think that goes with life too. There is an adjudication or sort of a balance that we try to strike about. Most of it's risk mitigation, like in the end with neurosurgery especially. what's the likelihood of having a complication given the current information that we have, and what are we trying to accomplish? This is the way I think about it.
Right.
I like that. That's awesome. Any other feelings on the provider patient?
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of mimic what Brad said. Like when I had my accident in the fall and experienced neck pain, I think for me that created a space where I could better see my patients kind of through my own lenses, and being able to connect with them and better understand what needs they have. It really just put a good emphasis on how important it truly is that we understand what they want to do. So
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, as a psychiatrist, I spend my entire day just seeing the patient where they're at, living from that heart space, as I like to put it, and really connecting at that very rudimentary level. And it really does not take a very long period of time. It's only a few seconds to witness that person's pain or that agony or that sadness, and just reflecting it back. That ability to do that, to be seen, to be validated in that moment, actually is an enormous stress release for that individual, and it fuels what I like to call the internal pharmacy. It fuels us living in a state of more and more health.
That's cool. So as a professional communicator, do you have any tips for what to do in those few seconds?
What I'm hearing over and over again is just like being in that moment and just recognizing that pain. Like, this is going to be hard. I can see this, the agony and all the worry and all of the pain that you are experiencing. And I can't change this for you, but I want you to know I see this, and there are ways to work through this.
Interesting. Cool. Fascinating. Okay. You know what? I want to skip this one. And I want to move to this one. When you come to one of the many moments in your life where you must give an account of yourself, do not, I pray, discount that you fill the dying man's days with stated joy. Doctors, it turns out, need hope too. And human knowledge is never contained in one person. Truth comes somewhere above all of them. So, as a provider, as a person, as a patient, what does legacy mean to you? Because in the end, this is kind of what this book was about, right? What legacy do you leave? How do you face death? How do you enjoy and cultivate your relationships? So what does it mean to you?
It's interesting that you put those quotes on there, because as I think about what I would love to see a legacy be, I think doctors, and I would think that any caregiver, anybody in medicine, needs hope. And then the knowledge is never contained in one person. We've talked extensively about how there is kind of a many eyes coming. And so maybe a legacy, I would hope that these morning rounds and the upcoming conference leads as a place where people could go to have that hope continuously restored, and where their contribution can be heard and added to, so that there's sort of just truth that comes out that is better than what we could have done.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that he talked a lot about what gives your life meaning. And I think as a provider, the opportunity you have to connect with their patients is really valuable, and just the time to listen to them. As that's what kind of gets your life speed, and that's that art, just your adoption.
Right. Right. He does ask that question quite a bit. I think, I saved one of the quote. Oh, do you think my life has meaning? Did I make the right choices? And it's interesting to think that, he had just a couple years from the time of his diagnosis to the end of his life, right? And I don't know if I ask those questions to myself all the time, right? But he had to really cram those questions into the last year or so of his life. And so it would be a little more interesting, maybe a little better to ask those questions a little more regularly to ourselves. So
I had a moment last night with my daughter, and as I think about it, it kind of brings tears to me, but she I got home around 6:30, and I told her I was going to go paint the basement. We're finishing the basement right now, and I wanted her to come help me. And she said, Dad, you worked all day, and now you're going to go work more. What? You haven't played with me all day. And I said, Emerson. She's like, you don't play with me anymore. I said, yesterday we played all day. She said, well, that was yesterday. And as I think about that, like, that's what our kids remember. That's what life's all about, So we didn't paint last night. We played instead. Like, those are the moments that really matter. I think about John Edwards Sr. talking about helping out Gary with his homework and, his presentation the next day, how it just flunked, it seems like those things are so big, but those are the moments that Gary probably remembered, and that, John remembered too. That's really what has meaning and connection when we choose to put those things that seem like they matter a lot aside and to say, maybe the basement's not the most important thing right now. Maybe we get that tomorrow.
That's awesome.
When we do hospice, sometimes the patients are in the 11th hour ready to die. They don't think about the professional achievements. They think more about the memories that they have with the family. And this is why sometimes we change that we try to celebrate life before you die. Because you're going to remember those beautiful moments with Laura, or activity that you did, or whatever you did with your family. Because that goes with you, and that gives you peace of mind.
I love that. And you bring up one last quote that we'll end on is, even if I'm dying until I actually die, I am still living. So this is a great book. Thank you for the person who suggested it. I don't know who it was. Was it Brandy? Was it you? Thanks, Brandy. It was Brandy. If you have a book that you'd like to read for our next book club, please send me a text. But thank you, everybody.